Hi, this is Steve Sharp, Esteem Therapy Yorkshire. Welcome back to Vicious to Virtuous, my free recovery program, and this is module 4. In fact, this is part 1 of 2, and in these we are focusing in more detail on how specialist treatment therapists like myself here at Esteem Therapy Yorkshire help sex and porn addicts successfully overcome their self-defeating behaviours and get into permanent recovery. In essence, the tools for recovery are aimed at disrupting the automated habitual processes in your addicted brain so that you can gradually and surely regain full control of your cognitive and mental functioning and be able to make healthy choices instead of self-defeating ones. This is based on the idea that your addiction is a result of conditioning. Now, we often refer to this sort of conditioning as classical conditioning. You would of course heard of Pavlov, the famous behavioural scientist who trained dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell. He achieved this in precisely the same way your addiction has formed. Pavlov's dogs' brains made a conditioned association between the sound of a bell, rung at feeding times, and food. When conditioned to the bell, dogs didn't need to be in the presence of food to be hungry. Their brains heard the bell and created salivation. In exactly the same way, addicts teach their brains to associate porn or other sexually compulsive behaviours with regular routines and rituals, familiar locations and certain people, for example. Even times of the day where these have been part of a regular long-standing addiction cycle can be a stimulus. In the same way that Pavlov's dogs could be de-taught to salivate if new stimuli were introduced, your addiction can be conditioned out. Addictive conditioning can be disrupted with the removal of its stimulus and the introduction of new associations instead, different routines, places, and avoidance of certain people. Changing this conditioning takes repetition and time and requires discipline. But aside from solitary confinement for 3 months, is the only viable way to really break addiction whilst continuing with your life in as normal a way as possible. So the first major strategy I use with my clients when they come to see me is the management of their environment. I give examples of these in separate tables on my website that address technology, alone time and leisure time. One client found success just by sleeping in a different room. So sometimes it can be something really simple. So the idea here is to avoid or eliminate stimuli that the brain associates with the behaviours. This is the equivalent of Pavlov's bell. So for example, driving near familiar escort locations, or being alone in familiar places where porn can be secretly accessed. Opening up apps and social media are examples of these kinds of associations that the brain makes with the acting out. Sustained avoidance will start the process of extinguishing the conditioned response that triggers cravings. I've already talked about mindfulness in previous modules, but I want to add to those comments by showing how mindfulness can help to conquer the Pavlov-like conditioning of the addicted brain. As you probably know, mindfulness is a sort of a catch-all term, but one which I'm using here as reference to a form of heightened and sustained self-awareness. That is, being more awakened to the emotional and psychological responses of your mind on a continuous basis. This will alert you to a number of things. Firstly, when you are possibly putting yourself at risk of exposure to the conditioned addiction response. Secondly, signals that your brain is sending you, requesting that you have a need to be satisfied. And thirdly, a cue or a call from your brain that it is about to recommend an automated self-defeating addiction-related course of action, but which now you need to intercept by taking control of your thoughts. Mindfulness will help you address cravings by alerting you when you need to question the automated directives from your brain that are pushing you towards acting out. By the way, your brain will not be inviting your opinion, it will just tell you to act out. Responding with new thought patterns such as, now I see you coming, I'm going to sidestep you. Take control and meet this need with this healthy alternative behaviour instead. By the time you become alert to your brain's poor recommendations about acting out with addictive behaviours, you can assume something has already been going on in your or unconscious mind for quite a while. It has only now emerged as a craving. That something is probably the brain battling with some negative emotions or psychological disturbance. Often these are about being hurt or lonely or feeling rejected. These deeper triggers can be resolved through therapy or self-help at a later stage. But what we can work on at the moment is the conditioned craving that the brain has developed in order to deal with these negative emotions. And that's what we're talking about here, disrupting that conditioned pattern. So to summarise and make sense of what we've said in this module so far, here's an example of a client and the work they did. I mean, obviously I've simplified it, but it gives you a good idea of how these ideas can be put into practice. So let's call this client A, and this client looks at porn every night on return from work, which can often be a demanding and stressful day for him. Before his partner gets home, he can spend an hour or more on porn, escaping from the day's stresses through sexual arousal and masturbation. His brain has become conditioned to two things: A, escaping from stress by using porn and sex, and B, leaving work, arriving home to an empty house with unfettered access to the internet for 1 or 2 hours. So this client disrupted this conditioning by doing something different each night, like walking home, visiting family, going for a swim, shopping for groceries and making a meal ready for his partner's return from work. And over time, as the abstinence grew, his brain learned a new routine and instead became conditioned to new healthy habits. As his recovery progressed, client A also worked on the deeper issues underlying his work-related anxieties, which weakened his brain's automatic reaching out for an escape from stress. Finally, in this first part of Module 4, I want to briefly introduce you to my Mindfulness toolkit. This incorporates the tools discussed in Modules 3 and 4 and is summarised into 5 main categories: mindfulness, the M, instant distraction, the I, distorted thinking, the D, adverse consequences, the A, and self-validating, that's the S, Midas. So this provides an easy to recall summary of the headline strategies I use with my clients and which you will hear about in these modules. The Mindfulness Toolkit is explained in my written Module 4 at esteemtherapyyorkshire.co.uk. Next, in Module 4 Part 2, we will be looking at how therapy is used to break the ritual or sequence of an addiction cycle. We will be doing this by looking at how we map out the sequence so that we can locate choice points, or maybe you could think of them as deal-breaking moments, and how distractions can be applied. We also explore the powerful role of reward in sex and porn addiction and how to turn this to your advantage to secure recovery. Thank you for listening.